Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First topic up this morning is rather important, but doesn't exactly necessarily lend itself to cheery and friendly conversation. We're going to talk about the European Union and immigration. We're going to talk about the, frankly, to my eyes, ears, in fact all my senses, astonishing development this morning whereby a Home Secretary has commissioned a report into the role that EU migrant workers play in Britain over a year after the country voted, in some ways, to chuck them out. I mean, in some ways. Obviously, the massive majority of Leave voters didn't vote to do that, but the significant proportion of people who do call for, borders to be closed and drawbridges to be pulled up and sundry other catchphrases and mot juste, do. And I just don't know anymore whether or not we're living in parallel universes or whether or not there's some sort of epic key that is eluding half of the country and yet nestles comfortably in the pocket of the other half. So we'll do what the Home Secretary wants to do. I don't know what to say about the fact that the Immigration Minister, Brandon Lewis, is doing the rounds at the moment saying free movement is going to stop in March of 2019, and the Home Secretary is saying it isn't. Effectively saying we will have to have a period of transition. How long it is and what it looks like depends partly upon what answers she gets to the questions that she's now about to ask. Do you know what this is? I think I know what this is, and it's taken so long for the penny to drop. Partly because people like Amber Rudd, who, like most of the Parliamentary Conservative Party, believes that Britain's interests will be damaged by leaving the European Union, like the Prime Minister, like every Prime Minister we've ever had does, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer does, like most of the Cabinet does. But, of course, the country, the will of the people, doesn't. So what I think has happened, this is just me thinking out loud, I think this is sort of reality beginning to bite. So what we've had in this country for the last 10 years, but specifically for the last 2, is loads and loads of people, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, loads and loads of people who are utterly convinced they know exactly what migration is, does, and looks like. Everybody's convinced they know. And I am definitely guilty of this, because I don't know for sure how it's affected everybody's life. I know what the numbers are. I know actually what the reports and the statistics and the academic research and the findings, and then because I present a phone-in show, I've got more anecdotal evidence than almost everybody else. And I know that historically all the people who ring me up to tell me how awful it is when asked for evidence don't have any. They've got Daily Mail headlines to revert to, or ludicrous sort of repetitions of sound bites made popular by the liar Farage. All of these sort of obvious positions fall into place. But I'm just as guilty. I say, of course, it hasn't had a negative impact on your life. How do I know that? But there's an absence of reality in that conversation because it's all been about opinion. And what we have done, I don't think it's unique to Britain. I don't think it's unique to this period of history as well. But what we seem to have done is elevate opinion to the status of statistic. We talked about this a bit, didn't we? What were we talking about the other day? When we were talking about how we've ended up offering false equivalents to opinions. I can't remember what the issue was, but it was no doubt political. We've kind of elevated opinion to the status of fact. You get it a lot. I get it more, oddly, when I'm working at the BBC, where the desperation to be balanced, to be impartial, is so acute now that if we were debating Galileo, if I promise you, if I was presenting a BBC programme about Galileo's scientific evidence regarding heliocentrism, the fact that, whether the Earth revolves around the Sun or the Sun revolves around the Earth, and Galileo Galilei had brought in his telescope secured research and had put it down right in front of me in the TV studio at the BBC. Look, here's proof, okay, that the Earth revolves around the Sun. Here it is. Here's your proof. Here's picture 1, picture 2, picture 3. And by the way, I've just hopped in a DeLorean sports car 250 years into the future, and I've brought back a camera from space. I've taken some pictures from space that look absolutely incontrovertible. So we'd spend 5 minutes talking to Galileo Galilei, and then we'd get Bert Jessup on to tell us why he's absolutely convinced that the Sun revolves around Earth. because he got up in the morning, he saw sun in the sky, and he knows that sun moved, and therefore sun... and we'd have to give him equal time. So you'd have Galileo Galilei, one of the most visionary and incredible scientists in the history of humanity. You have 5 minutes for him, and then 5 minutes for Bert Jessup, who knows that eggs is eggs and onions is onions, as sure can be. And you treat them exactly the same. And I mean, it's weird, really, when you think about it, because it's usually all the people who are fetishising their own opinions and turning them into facts that are usually squealing about bias and balance and impartiality. It's all these mad people who are, I don't know who they're frightened of this time. It was Jews 100 years ago, it's Muslims today, trans people, gays, women, blacks, whoever it is. They're all obsessing all the time, impartiality. There's someone on the telly saying we should treat all human beings the same or judge them according to their actions. That's disgusting. I want to judge them according to their sexuality, their gender, their ethnicity, their colour. They're the ones usually squealing about imbalance and partiality or impartiality and balance. And that's kind of why we've ended up in such a weird, fact-free universe. Everybody's so frightened of being accused of this, that or the other that they bend over backwards to accommodate people who are actually mad. And you can't accommodate madness. So, you know, a bit like some of Corbyn's comments last week about immigration, he's working on that very cynical presumption that if you throw a bone to these people, they'll be too busy gnawing on it to shout at you. But everybody with a brain in their head knows that if you throw a bone to racists, they'll chomp through it in 30 seconds flat and move on to the next level of bigotry and hatred. So all of the opinion has been elevated into fact. In fact, you can see it pretty clearly in some corners when you hear phrases, and they're not confined to this programme. You hear phrases like, you can prove anything with facts. You can prove anything with facts. You can't. You can't, for example, prove that the sun revolves around the earth with facts. You can only prove with facts that the earth revolves around the sun. Still with me at the back? So that, I think, is what has happened today, is that the Home Secretary has had to finally recognise that she needs to deal in facts. She can't deal in feelings anymore. She can't have an immigration policy that's built upon Paul Dacre's opinions. She can't do it anymore. The more the clock ticks, the closer we get to that date, the harder it is becoming for the grown-ups, of whom there are a few. Amber Rudd seems to be one of them. I speak as someone whose radio broadcast last year was responsible for changing Conservative Party policy at the very highest level. So, but I still think Amber Rudd's a fairly impressive politician. She seems to be a grown-up. So she knows, I think Philip Hammond knows, Theresa May, the jury's still out. They know that they're going to have to start dealing in facts. And it's terrifying to them because so much of the pro-Brexit movement is built upon very, very strong feelings. I'm not criticising those feelings, but they're not facts. And that's why she's had to commission a report. And that's why it's taken so long. Because if you'd announced a year ago, we're going to commission a report into EU migration, how many people would have jumped up and said, we don't need a report, it's absolutely brilliant, or we don't need a report, it's absolutely awful. And asked to provide evidence, the people who said it was brilliant would be able to provide some, but it wouldn't be conclusive. The people who say that it's awful would also have been able to say, well, I didn't see a doctor last week, or my child didn't get into their first choice school, therefore EU migration must be the root of all evil in this country. So now she's trying to find facts, and we often pat ourselves on the back on this programme for dealing almost exclusively in facts. I love a bit of feeling, don't get me wrong, but I'm never going to elevate it to the same status as fact. And that's all I want to do today. I don't want any arguments, I don't want any fisticuffs. I'm feeling a bit fragile, to be honest with you, so I'm not really up for a scrap. I'm up for some facts. First question is, why do you think it's taken Amber Rudd so long to commission a report into the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens living in Britain? There's a little bit of me, and I'm desperately unfashionable on this, I realise. There's a little bit of me that thinks we probably should have done this before we had a vote on leaving. No? Does that make me sound like some sort of unicorn awaiting idealist? Before we have a vote on the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain, do you think we should find out about the economic and social... No, we don't need to do that. Breaking point. Drawbridges. Down with foreign... No, I'd like to know some stuff before I vote. I'd like to know for sure. I've read the Bank of England reports. I've read the University of Oxford's academic papers. I've spoken to thousands and thousands of people, but I don't have actual... Can we do some actual qualitative research into, quotes, the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain? No, I know the Treasury has added up how much they pay in tax and how much they take out in tax, and they are massively net contributors. I know all that, but lots of people don't like that fact, so they prefer to shout that it's not true. I want facts. I want black and white stuff. And it seems staggering to me that we've waited until practically August of 2017 to find out something we needed to know before we cast a vote in June 2016. So that's question number one. I see it as reality biting. I see this as the grown-ups, the ones who actually do have to run the country. I think it's important to remember that. They do have to run the country, and some of them don't seem to be embarked upon ego trips in quite the same way that other members of the cabinet do. So Amber Rudd wants to know what's going to be best for Britain. Do you know it's actually in the code of conduct for members of parliament that they're not supposed to do anything that they consider to be against the national interest? We have, by getting our country back, utterly debased parliamentary sovereignty and democracy by insisting now on front pages of newspapers and up and down the country, we insist that our MPs do things that they personally believe to be against the national interest. We're jolly well ordering them to do it. Some of them are getting death threats when it looks like they're not going to do it. That's what we've done to democracy in this country. It's a requirement for them never to act against the national interest, and now we're forcing them to act against what they consider to be the national interest. So give them a break, all of them, for a moment. These politicians have to deal in fact. They have to deal in reality. They can't just write newspaper articles. No wonder George Osborne's enjoying his new life so much. So even as Chancellor, you have to deal in cold, hard reality. You can deny it a bit, you can manipulate it, you can have different opinions about what it represents. But as a journalist, you can say whatever you want. As a politician, there comes a point when you can't anymore. And I think Amber Rudd has reached that point. And now she's going to need evidence to base her policies on. Good grief. Evidence-based policy. Actually sounding like something extraordinary or novel. Evidence-based policy. If you want a policy about people from the European Union who currently work here, what are you going to base that policy on? They seem to have spent 14 or 15 months pretending they were going to base it upon Paul Dacre's wet dreams. Now they're recognising they have to base it upon reality. So over a year after the referendum, the government is finally asking, what actually are the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain? And if you needed evidence of just how bonkers everything has become, there it is. Over a year since the referendum, we're actually asking about the role that EU workers play in this country. I haven't asked you a question yet, and it's already time for the travel news. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The question I have for you, tell me about your business, actually. Let's just start that, shall we? Well, tell me about your business and why you are confident that although you currently employ a lot of Eastern European people, you're confident you'll be fine. If they can't come here, if they can't stay here or move between countries in quite the same way that they could before, you'll be okay because ... I haven't run a business in the conventional sense of the word, so I don't know. What I do know is that it's not confined to London. I used to think it was. And oddly enough, it was Cafe Nero in Kidderminster when I was served by two Polish girls that made me realise this isn't a London-based issue. Everywhere I go, particularly in the service sector, people who are working to serve the public, everywhere I go, the predominance, particularly young Eastern European people, is quite breathtaking. It's quite astonishing. And I don't know what's going to happen if that changes. I want you to tell me, from the point of view of your business. That's all. What are the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain with regard to the business that you run? OK? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the other question I've got, if you fancy it, if you want to do some sort of amateur political analysis, which, as you know, I hold in much higher regard than most professional political analysis, do you want to have a crack at just explaining why the Home Secretary has waited? In fact, the last Home Secretary, since 2010 we could have undertaken this. Who was the Home Secretary between 2010 and 2016? Oh, it slips my mind for the moment. But why do you not think either the previous Home Secretary or the current Home Secretary did this before? What are the actual facts regarding EU migration? I don't have an answer to that. I kind of hope that you do. And that's an incredibly long introduction. My apologies. I've double-checked. I don't think I'm misrepresenting this. The Immigration Minister, Brandon... what's his name? Brandon Lewis, and the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, seem to be completely contradicting each other on the future of free movement between Britain and the rest of the European Union. Just genuinely and completely contradicting each other. And we've reached such a point now in politics that this isn't even particularly big news. I sort of think back, where else in history could you have had two senior members with responsibility for the same policies contradicting each other so completely? I can't make sense of any of it anymore. But I can't make sense in the first and foremost issue this morning on why it's taken so long for the Home Secretary to commission an independent analysis of the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain. So that's the clever question. Why do you think it's taken so long? Honestly. 03456060973. And then the experience rather than analysis-based question this morning is, what in the context solely of your business, your commercial enterprise, what's she going to find out? Because my big theory, you know what it is, don't you? My big fear is the unwelcome mat. Regardless of what policies we eventually come up with, we've laid out an unwelcome mat. It's the opposite of control. You can't control immigration and emigration. Think about it for a minute. You can't actually force people to come here. So what's going to happen if they don't, whether they're allowed to or not? Andrew's in Shoreditch. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there.
Thank God, someone else's voice finally on the radio. I fear people climbing the walls up and down the country. Quick, talk for ages.
Okay, so basically all I can talk about is my specific company. So we have a technology company, and pretty much my entire team consists of people from all over Europe. You know, I've got Spanish people, German, French, Italian, Bulgarian, you name it, I have them. And if we close the borders and we make it difficult for these people to come, and I ask them, why are you here? And I get the same answer every single time, because we feel London is a place to be, you know, and especially for technology now. And there's this hugely talented pool of people coming over here. And if we close the borders, we're going to be at a disadvantage, I think, you know, competitively against the world. And I feel, you know, I've been in business for 15 years. Since the borders have opened, the talent pool has increased, and we have an advantage over a lot of other European countries.
But there are 1.5 million unemployed people in this country. Why can't they do the jobs that you describe?
I don't know. I tell you, the certain skills that I employ, I feel what the government needs to look at is they need to encourage certain skills at school. They need to encourage, you know.
But they can't. There's no point doing that if we're still bringing in workers from all the countries you've just mentioned. What's the point in training up young?
Because I feel that there's so much demand for these jobs, we wouldn't be able to fill them anyway. You know, in technology, marketing, you know, in the way the world is going with mobile, with just everything on the way the world is moving, the demand is so great that you can't. There's not enough of these talented people. You know, people outsource because there's not enough.
So you describe highly skilled, talented workers, of which there is a shortage, and somebody who's a bit dopey says in response to you, well, hang on, we've got loads of highly unskilled, untalented, unemployed people. They could easily fill the gaps that are currently being filled by all the talented, highly skilled people that have moved here from overseas.
Yeah, my question to that is the unskilled people, if they really want to do something, they can go and learn the skills. You know, no one's.
But then we have to invite calls from people who have an unskilled workforce, because that perhaps would be a very different picture from the one that you paint. Briefly, regardless of what the rules and the laws may be, what mood do you think that your colleagues feel about this country now, and is it the same as it was 2 years ago?
Look, I feel the people that are here now, you know, that are here, they've established themselves, they want to stay here, they want to be here, they like the country, they feel welcome here, and, you know, I feel you have to keep that. I don't think that should change even when we leave.
That's the challenge. That's the challenge of all decent people, isn't it, in Britain? Yeah. Andrew, I'm getting complaints about the phone line, only from Wayne in Basildon, so normally I'd ignore it, but I think you've had a fair crack of the whip. Number you need, thank you. So that's an interesting development in terms of the skilled versus unskilled, but Andrew's experience doesn't, of course, address the rhetoric of the unskilled workforce. Construction industry is crying out for skilled workers, but whenever, historically on LBC, I've had conversations about these issues in the past, I've been told that there's a huge problem of unskilled people being undercut and somewhat naively perhaps, I always respond by saying, well, get skilled then. And that's possibly part of this 1.5 million unemployed people versus EU migration. Of course, those 1.5 million unemployed people could actually move anywhere in Europe at the moment in search of work if they were really keen to find it, but I guess they haven't. Mark's in Milton Keynes. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Just responding to what the gentleman said.
Yeah.
There are older people that do have the skills, but a lot of companies are looking for a certain type of degree. Well,
we don't know the details of Andrew's business, and if he's working in technology and IT, it's probably quite cutting edge, and not necessarily the case that the unemployed older people would be up to speed with all the latest developments. But tell me what you rang in to say.
I know people. We were on the work rope program that would run rings around people on computer programming and stuff.
Yeah, all right, okay.
For the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is the real element is facts. I voted out because of money. I don't know the accounts of the EU and where the money goes.
They've been published for the last 17 years.
But they're not externally audited.
They are.
But also the money, not externally audited, but the money coming in, back in, goes to various institutions like and the other institutions.
Yes, I'm interested in what you think Amber Rudd is going to discover from her analysis of economic and social contributions and costs.
Well, we had Mr. Osborne saying some years ago that immigration was good for jobs, good for the economy, but I think that was from a business perspective. I would like to actually see the facts. I would actually like to see the open facts, and if she's going to actually do an independent investigation, then brilliant.
Why do you think it's taken so long?
Because they want to support the economy, not the people.
How do you separate the two?
Well, you either look after the people or you look after the businesses.
Well, what do you mean by the people? What do you mean by look after? I mean, the economy, to me, it's almost inextricable from the people. I think that's one of the problems with our society. But surely if the economy is doing well, then arguably that's one of the most reliable indicators of whether or not people are well off.
Well, we see people in poverty going to food banks on the one hand, and then we see a certain institution paying themselves, one person, £2 million. You know, what's the balance? You know,
mate, I don't know whether it's me or whether you're just sort of saying words in a sort of relatively random order. So you think there's a relationship between Chris Evans's wages and food banks? And,
yes.
that's what Amber Rudd is going to discover when she undertakes a detailed...
Not necessarily to do with immigration, but the thing is, if you want to import a load of people that will work for less than I can live on, then maybe
But you said you liked facts.
Yes, that's what I said.
Now you've just invented something.
I would like to actually, for all the actual, where it's the accounts, the actual numbers of people coming in, going out, the actual number of people that are unemployed, that are skilled. Not everyone that's unemployed.
All of this, most of the things you've just mentioned, they're already available. How hard do you look, if you don't mind me asking? When did you last Google EU accounts audit?
As I say, they haven't been externally audited.
Well, has the British Treasury been externally audited?
Well, if I go to my local council...
Yes or no, question mark. Yes or no. Has the Treasury been externally audited recently?
I don't know.
10:31. It's my fault. The lad in Milton Keynes a minute ago, I don't know why, I said just Google it, you know, and if you do Google it, the first thing you find is every year there is an independent external audit of the EU's annual accounts and resource management by the European Court of Auditors, resulting in a report for the Parliament and Council. But is it Martin or Mark in Milton Keynes really, really likes facts. He just hasn't got any, and then cares so much about auditing financial accounts he doesn't even know whether or not the Treasury ever gets externally audited. It's just not true, but it's not his fault. There's plenty of people telling lies. Speaking of liars, if they weren't auditing EU accounts, how would they be able to demand that people repay money? MEPs like the Liar Farage repay £80,000 to the EU. How could they do that if they weren't auditing the accounts? 10:35. So why do you think it's taken Amber Rudd so long to call this investigation, this analysis? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Martin is in Hull. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's great to speak to you at last.
Likewise. Do you know, I've just realised that I adopted a Yorkshire accent when I was doing an impression of somebody stupid a minute ago. My mum is going to kill me after the programme today. I should have gone for a posh accent instead of a Yorkshire accent. My apologies to you and everybody else in the north. Carry on, Martin.
That's fine. Mine is a general observation, James, about I'm an HGV driver, and I go to various distribution centres up and down the country on a daily basis. have been doing for years. And I can say that if we didn't have East Europeans, young East Europeans that we have here, these places would not function, and people would soon realise how important they are to our way of life.
But we've got 1.5 million unemployed, so we could fill up all the distribution centres with them, couldn't we?
No, James, I'm not aware of kids queuing up to do these jobs. They really aren't. These kids are in these warehouses. These Europeans are absolutely fantastic. They work hard. They get on with the job. They know what they're doing. They can speak our language. They're absolutely brilliant. I've not met any that have been a problem at all.
I mean, nor have I, but it doesn't necessarily mean that our experiences mirror the broader reality. What about the question of what is obvious to you doing your job? And there are plenty of people in the haulage industry who feel that European Union membership has been a bad thing. But in terms of you doing your job, why do you think the Home Secretary has taken so long to ask the question that you just answered?
I really don't know. I think it's, as you said earlier, possibly the realisation now that, blimey, we could be going off a cliff here, big style, and the industry has finally got its act together and made representations to them that we need these people. All Amber Rudd or was it Croker, the other guy, was it?
This morning, Brandon Lewis.
Oh, sorry, Brandon Lewis. All they had to do was come round with me for a while and they would see that these places are desperate to keep these people.
But
I'm not aware of kids queuing up to take their jobs. They're British kids. I'm not aware of that happening.
No, and I mean, unemployment's very low, albeit that a lot of people are employed in circumstances that you wouldn't really wish upon your worst enemy. The unemployment percentages are very low. Let's stick with that figure, though, 1.5 million or thereabouts, and that seems to be an argument some people still make. The idea that all of the colleagues Martin has encountered could be replaced by this great army of unemployed people in Britain. I just don't necessarily see the wisdom in that. Martin, thank you. 10:38 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. There is one answer, perhaps, to the question of why this has taken so long. The predecessor in the Home Office to Amber Rudd, a politician called Theresa May, according to The Independent in April of this year, sabotaged a government-wide plan to explain the benefits of immigration to the British public. It's a Cabinet Office paper that was leaked to The Independent that suggests, and I'm reading from the paper now, Mrs May used her political clout to prevent the bid to explain the positive impacts that immigrants bring to the economy and the NHS. And just going back to the lad in Milton Keynes, because I guess it's respectful. If you look at the Full Fact website, independent organisation that judges or adjudicates on sort of claims that are routinely made in the media, their conclusion is the independent auditors say that the EU accounts are accurate and have been since 2007, but they record significant errors in how money is paid, and this has been the case since 1995. So again, someone rings me, and I'd say this with love and affection and frustration rather than derision and dismissal. Someone rings me to tell me how much they like facts, presents me with an untruth, with a falsehood that's been perpetuated by all the usual dishonest suspects, and goes away, I presume, convinced that he's still right. And all of the evidence is available if you look for it. Why has it taken the Home Secretary so long to start searching? Carlos is in Preston. Carlos, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm Portuguese and I'm married to a British, and she was working in Portugal at the time.
Yes.
And we got married and we moved here. I have a business in Portugal where I employed Eastern European migrants and Portuguese, and now I have a business here where I employ English and Eastern European.
Yes. What
I would like to know is, what I can offer is that I know the experience from both sides, and there is bigotry also towards migrants in Portugal, and it's a natural thing from human nature. What I think is that when a migrant comes to this country and they have to register for the national insurance and take to work on a farm for 6 months, how many of those go back to their own country and say, let's go to the national insurance and deregister from, and how does that influence on the net migration numbers?
It's a good question. I don't know that anyone would be bothered to deregister, do you? Is there any point doing it?
From a practical, and I'm here with these guys, and I know because sometimes I have to help them with the process. They have to, register for this or that. But no one, whoever goes back, in the practical way, no one will go and say, "Oh, before I leave, I'll have to go to take out my name from the national insurance because I'm not going to go back."
But that's why the daily, I forget which newspapers, probably the Express. I remember a couple of years ago they got their knickers in a right old twist about national insurance numbers. The real figures are even higher, and I couldn't quite understand why. I think you've just nailed it, because I don't know anyone who's ever going to bother saying, I don't need my national insurance number anymore.
Exactly.
And then you look at the numbers just in the industry that you chose in terms of seasonal fruit and vegetable work. The numbers, there's 1,500 vacancies in the industry now. This time last year there were 134, so they've all gone, and whether or not they bothered handing in their national insurance number at the border.
On the statistics, they're still present on the statistics. So the net migration is influenced and is inflated by these numbers, because no one will go back to the office and say, I want to take my name down. I want to not show on the statistics because I'm not going to go back.
Why do you think, from your perspective, Carlos, Portuguese employer of, like most employers in this country, a wide array of nationalities, why do you think it's taken so long for the Home Secretary, and include the previous one, the last two Home Secretaries, one of whom is now Prime Minister, to carry out a detailed analysis of the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain, something that should have been of absolutely intrinsic importance to any ludicrously binary referendum question?
Because facts are facts, and they'll tell you whatever you want to see depending on the perspective that you look at that. And it wasn't politically of interest 2 years ago or 1 year ago to have such at these numbers and these figures, and
that's all I've got as well.
Is a duel between powers that are messing with people's minds and putting how many. What's the numbers, and how many? What's this report where it says how many jobs has the internet taken out, and how many jobs has the internet contributed into? So it's a change. It's a dynamic on society. It always happens. It always will happen. If a Victorian person would look at someone from the Second World War lifestyle, what would they think? So society is always going to change.
Society is always going to change and evolve, and usually it moves forward. Sometimes it takes, as our friends in America are suffering at the moment, it takes steps backwards. But I've got nothing better than Carlos. I think he's on the money, but you're welcome to disagree. I say, why is she doing it now? It's because the deadline is approaching. March 2019, we're out. And so, arguments based upon falsehoods and feelings aren't going to cut the mustard anymore. I please God they're not going to cut the mustard anymore, because if we double down on falsehoods and feelings, then we are all really in trouble. So Amber Rudd, who appears to be a grown-up politician, is effectively, I don't think she'd have done this if Theresa May's authority hadn't been weakened. If Theresa May sat on or sabotaged a plan to explain to the British public why they were being lied to on a pretty epic scale about immigration, if Theresa May sabotaged that, then if she'd been in a strong position post-election, it's highly unlikely her Home Secretary would have resurrected the idea. Because that's, I think, what's going to emerge from this. You do a detailed analysis of the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain, and you're going to see a fairly rosy picture. And that, I guess, is a nightmare for half the cabinet, and too little too late for the other half. It's 10:45. The number you need is 03456060973. They call it the silly season. You probably know that already. This sort of period of summer where Parliament isn't sitting, because the news agenda can be quite strange. It's why we will, no doubt, in the coming weeks, find ourselves talking about things that we wouldn't have talked about during the parliamentary session. So much news comes from politics, comes from Parliament. And we've had such a strange year as well. It's still reeling, personally. I don't know about you, but the terror attacks and then Grenfell Tower combining to create I don't know if I should tell you this because I don't want you to sort of suffer from similar conniptions, but Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings in particular, first thing I do, even before my wife's woken up, just check my phone to make sure nothing awful's happened overnight. It's weird. I've never been like that before in my life. But it is now, I mentioned that because there was so much news, it felt like, coming at us in the first half of 2017. I don't know what the second half is going to look like, but I do know that we're probably going to see more and more instances of cabinet colleagues completely contradicting each other on the same day. Not 6 months apart, or, well, with the benefit of hindsight, I realise I was wrong and my learned colleague was right. My honourable colleague was right. We've got an immigration minister today saying, right, all over at March 2019, while the Home Secretary says, no, we're going to do a big research, a big report into, what we need to do in this transitional period. And still, I guess if you wanted to take the temperature of the country, we'd still be pretty much split down the middle, with one side increasingly, I think it's fair to say, relying upon evidence and numbers for their position, and another side relying on the even more powerful motivation of feelings, really strong, powerful feelings. And we sometimes denigrate feelings on this programme. I think it's a terrible shame when you allow them to overcome facts. But without feelings, you wouldn't win wars. Let's make that absolutely clear. There are historical justifications for whipping up patriotism, and that historical justification is usually to win a war. I know you can find a quote from Hermann Goering or Joseph Goebbels talking about how bovine the population is, and if you throw them a bone of nationalism and patriotism, you can get them to send their sons to die in foreign fields for a cause they don't really understand. But some causes are worth fighting for, and therefore worth dying for, and you wouldn't have that if it wasn't for feelings. What I find so bizarre about what's happened to my country in recent years is that a period of unprecedented complacency and peace has created an atmosphere in which these kind of feelings can be whipped up. And how do you whip them up? Well, you've got to point at someone. You can't whip up a feeling of fear and violence without pointing at an enemy. And what's the enemy they've pointed at? Well, very simply put, emigres, people who have moved here from other countries to work and live and love. That they're the ones who have been pointed at. You can't deny that. You might not have followed the finger that was pointing, but you can't pretend people weren't pointing at emigres and going, look, down with them. And now finally a Home Secretary said, well, actually, maybe we should find out some facts. Question one, why do you think it's taken so long? Question two, what do you think they are going to find out? The one interview I remember, it didn't happen on this radio station, so I won't go into too much detail. The fruit farmer describing how his 2,500 strong workforce was likely to disappear completely if, for example, Brandon Lewis's analysis of free movement is correct. Unless those people are allowed to continue moving freely in and out of Britain in order to do seasonal work in the summer, his entire business, he said himself, will go under. I play you the clip, but we're a bit funny about playing clips of rival radio stations on LBC.
16 minutes to 8. There's a warning today from Britain's berry growers that Brexit could crush the industry. The industry body, it's called British Summer Fruits, says that unless the seasonal labour supply is guaranteed, they'll be in trouble. And soft fruit production in this country is now worth more than £1.2 billion. Zoe Conway has been to Chewsley Fruit Farm near Godalming in Surrey.
I've just entered a large polytunnel where there are 5 or 6 people on their hands and knees in the straw picking strawberries. Excuse me, where are you from?
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria. Just in front of me is a woman on her hands and knees, moving fast. In the last minute, she's picked 25, 30 strawberries. What's your name?
Anna.
Where are you from?
Romania.
This looks like hard work.
Yeah. It's a good job for me.
What's your name?
Nick.
Quick work. In the heat.
Yes, I like this job
Why do you like it?
because I must take a lot of money. I must go to Romania and make one house.
You're building a house in Romania?
Yeah.
And how would you feel if you could not work in England anymore?
Very bad. I come here, I work, I pay the tax, I make everything correct.
The 500 or so people living here have access to a gym, a laundrette, a shop. It feels like so much more than a farm. It's like a small village. Tell me, what are you growing here?
We're growing blueberries called the Duke. I think you need to try.
It's really actually quite sweet, isn't it?
My name is Andrew. I'm from Poland, and I'm a farm manager on the Chewsley farm.
And are you worried about Brexit and the effect of Brexit on this farm?
Yes, I am. We already lost some people who were supposed to come back to us, and they changed their mind and they go to Germany and Holland. But
That's already happened.
Yeah, that's already happened, but there's only few people so far.
But do you think there is a danger that some people won't come back next year?
I think that's going to happen. We start seeing less people coming to recruitment in our agencies in Poland, Romania and Bulgaria. So we start seeing less people interested.
What do you say to the argument that actually you could recruit people here in Britain and that would be really great for British people?
We advertise every year. 5 years ago, we got one English-British person to...
One person?
One person in the last 5 years. He worked on it for one day and then he said it's not a job for him. We're trying to recruit English people and British people, but we can't get anyway.
I'm in the packing area and there are about 30 people on the assembly line, mostly women. They've got the punnets of strawberries and the women are putting the punnets onto a conveyor belt where they're then going to be sealed and labelled, ready to go to the supermarkets. And they seem to be working very fast.
They do get paid on what they do, so there is an incentive to work a bit faster. I'm Harry Hall, managing partner of Hall Hunter Partnership.
You did support leaving the European Union. Do you regret your vote?
I regret my vote in the face of the government I'm given.
What, that this is too hard a Brexit and this is too much about immigration? Is that what you mean?
The reason I voted to leave was that I'm in favour of sovereignty.
So this was never about control of our borders?
No, this was about sovereignty for me. As businessmen, we need clarity about our future direction. If I don't have my 2,500 staff that I need, or I have no certainty of that from 2019 onwards, I don't have a business. It's as simple as that.
Understandably. But the question was put to him, how did you vote? He said, I voted to leave. The interviewer said, why? And he kind of just mumbled sovereignty, having described how the business built up, presumably by his father and grandfather before him, was facing imminent oblivion as a direct result of politics. Andre's in Golders Green. Andre, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First, I would like to answer your first question. I think they didn't publish it earlier, and they didn't want to, to conduct the survey earlier because it would show the massive financial contribution that the immigrants bring here. And secondly, the human resource they bring here, especially from NHS perspective and from the IT section, which is two sectors that I know because my mom, she's a nurse in Romania. And prior to the financial crisis, from her sector, which was 80 nurses, 20 of them came to England.
Good grief.
After 2013, they all started to come back.
To Romania?
Yes,
okay.
Because the salary in Romania compared to 2008, 2009, when the financial crisis kicked in, they tripled now. So a nurse before used to have 200-300 euros. Now she has 600-700.
So the movement, I mean, this is as old as humanity itself. A certain type of person is possessed of enough freedom, vim and vigour to cross borders in pursuit of an improved livelihood, and then they still have sense of home, so if the livelihood at home improves, they'll move back again. That just seems to me to be straightforward, and yet some people listening presumably are hearing this explained for the very first time.
Yes, so this is one situation that started to happen, and you saw this from your figures that you heard from NHS, that few nurses started to come here from Eastern Europe.
Yes.
And this is why. And this will continue.
So the Royal College of Nursing also cite the English test as a reason why there might have been a decline in the nurses. So you just get all the facts out there. That's what one of the Royal Colleges has said. But the decline is 96%. It down a number of applications from qualified nurses in EU countries seeking to come here. 96% down.
Yes, English is also a factor as well. And from the IT perspective, I'm going to give you a bit of my background. So I finished university in management in Romania, and I finished a master in IT. I came here very easily, found a job very easily. And in the 7 years since I came here, I saw, I would say, 90% of my classmates from the master's time coming here as well.
So highly qualified Eastern European.
Yes. Yes,
emigres.
because it's very easy for us to make here, I would say, I don't know, 3-4 times the salary we would have in Romania.
And it's highly unlikely that the jobs you're doing there could be filled by poorly skilled, unqualified, unemployed people from anywhere, regardless of where they're from, although the 1.5... Have we not got anyone ringing in to say, why are the 1.7 million people, why can't they do Andre's job? Why can't they be the governor of the Bank of England? Why can't they manage the football team, the rugby team? I don't know. Try and find me someone like that, Caroline. Carry on, Andre.
Yes, and also I wanted to tell you that, first of all, think about it. In Eastern Europe, it's very cheap to do a university. So a larger part of the youngsters go to university, finish the university because they know they will find a very good job in IT in Romania and even a better one in London or in Paris or in New York or anywhere in the world. So
what's the downside, then?
Common sense.
Well, it is, but what's the downside?
The downside is that a lot of people think that we come here and I don't know, we live, and another fact, we do live in a house and we share that house with 3-4 more people, not 10 like it was said in the media, but 3-4 more people. So we don't pay, instead of £1,700 a month.
Yeah, but everybody does that. We did it yesterday. We spoke to a crane driver, didn't we? 2 days ago, or was it just yesterday? Who is living with his partner in a house, in a room, in a shared house, because he's saving up a deposit. That's got nothing to do with immigration and everything to do with artificial property inflation.
Yeah, and because of it, we have a lot more income to dispose. That's why...
So you go out and spend it.
Exactly, and we spend a lot
Damn you, coming over here, spending all your money, spending all your hard-earned money. And then, of course, if you sent some of it home, you'd be lampooned for that as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Before, maybe we used to spend money at home in 2010, 2011, when it was rough in Romania. But now, things are getting better there, so we don't have to send money to help our parents. So guess what? Between me and my wife, we make about 50,000 grand, from which about 10,000 only is our rent.
Yes, and the rest, whether you're saving it up or using it as disposable income, is immaterial. I mean, part of me is embarrassed that people like Andre feel the necessity to justify their existence, but part of me is also frightened, because once it is justified, once it is proven, once every point that he made turns out to be true on a much broader scale, then as this tweet from Robert suggests, it will be castigated. Well, Amber Rudd's analysis of EU migration will be castigated as an establishment stitch-up. You just know it. He's probably right, isn't he? Look, here is a massive dossier of very careful, detailed research showing you why you're wrong. Ha! That's the establishment conspiracy in full gear again. Carry on with this for a little bit longer. Astonishing, really, the more I think about it, that we've commissioned, whatever you think, okay, whether you're... Here's one. James, get to the nitty-gritty. Mass immigration has brought this country down into the gutter. We need to deport all the Islamic garbage Blair and Straw let in. And I have to click on those because obviously sometimes people are taking the mickey out of the kind of person that might send that with a straight face. So I click on it to see whether it's a real person or whether it's a sort of parody. That's very much a real person. Quite what the European Union has to do with... the potential deportation of what you describe as Islamic garbage, Blair and Straw let-in is beyond me, but I suspect that makes two of us. The question is, actually, why is she doing it now? Is it because, as the deadline approaches, Amber Rudd realises that all of the rhetoric in the world is not going to put food on tables. It's not going to put bodies in jobs. So they're going to need to start constructing some form of justification for explaining to the British public why we need lots and lots of people from other countries to come here and work. 4 minutes after 11. At least that's what employers tell me. They could all be wrong. Lee's in Bromley. Lee, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
You're an hard man to get through to, you are. Right. I can't understand why it's took us so long, but perhaps that's just politicians as a whole, because they all seem a bit slow, if you know. They're all probably privately educated. They probably want to go back and get a refund, because when it comes to common sense, they just ain't got any. So that's that out of the way. But I'm confused, as in immigration, even for Indigenous people, that you're paying out so much money for them, but they're only paying so much tax, national insurance. How can it be of a benefit? So if you just listen to this. So someone's earning £300 a week. He might get deducted £70 a week tax and national insurance, but he's got 2 kids. So he gets 30 quid back straight away in child benefit because he's got 2 kids. Then, because his money ain't that good, he probably gets £20 a week child tax credit. Yeah? So now we're £50 a week. All we're getting now is 20. Then 2 kids go to school. So even if you say £25 a week each, that's 50. We're now minus £25.
I think the figure is about 55% for people in Britain who are net takers from the economy, but the average for an EU migrant worker is that they're net contributors.
But, oh no, I'm not just talking like immigrants.
No, nor am I. 55% of the whole country, because you have to include pensioners as well once you start claiming your pension. So it's about 55% of us take out more than we put in.
Right. So how, like, as you said,
but EU migrants buck that trend because they're largely harder working and younger, so they're actually net contributors on average.
Yeah, but you still get the same benefit. That's part of EU law. They still get the same benefit.
That's what net contribution means. That's the number you're left with after you subtract what's taken out from what's put in.
Right, all right, that was just part of my confusion then. So fair.
Well, I'm glad to clear that up. What did you ring in to tell me?
But then also, we have got 1.5 million people unemployed, so surely it makes sense to get them working first. You know, you don't give them...
Well, hang on, that's a great point. I'm glad someone's finally made it. Matt's in Richmond. Matt, are you an employer?
I am indeed, yeah.
And what sort of role do EU workers... Stay where you are, Lee. What sort of role do EU workers play in your business?
Huge. Without them, I couldn't trade.
Well, why can't you just hire some of these 1.5 million unemployed people?
But a year and a half ago, when all this started kicking off, I've got 90% of my staff are Eastern European. And I thought, you know, you're going to lose a few, so let's start trying to employ some of our 1.5 million unemployed, or indeed, ignoring the unemployed for a minute, let's try and employ some of the employed British guys into the construction industry, into my business. Have I been able to find any who are actually any good? No.
Wait there. Lee, can you put Matt in touch with some of these people, do you think?
Well, I don't know what he's looking for. What sort of workers is he looking for? I don't know. I'm in the same boat. I could do with a lot of lorry drivers, but you can't get them.
Say that again?
Because the industry's been decimated.
Well, hang on a minute. You just said that the 1.5 million unemployed people should be doing the jobs, and now you're telling me you can't find people yourself.
Yeah, because who pays for the training?
Oh,
now,
Lee.
this fella's in building, so he's obviously looking for bricklayers and that.
Yeah, but you just said all of these migrant workers could be replaced by the 1.5 million unemployed people.
Have you not heard of apprenticeships? We don't do apprenticeships anymore. We used to do, but do you know what? When I was at school,
So who's going to do the jobs, Lee, tomorrow?
Well, it's not happening tomorrow, is it?
Well, OK, March 2019 then. Who's going to do the jobs if we stop freedom of movement?
All right, but it's just not everyone's a brain surgeon, not everyone's a bricklayer. You're telling me the 700,000...
Who's going to do all the jobs if we stop freedom of movement? Who's going to work for Matt? Who's going to drive the trucks, Lee?
Well, at the moment, we're stuck. But
so you've rung me up to tell me... Hang on a minute. Even by the standards of this programme, this is a bit special. You've rung me up to tell me that all of the jobs currently being done by European emigres could be done by 1.5 million unemployed, and you've ended by telling me that you can't even find drivers for your own business.
Right. So you're not listening. This is what you do. You're very good. You're very clever.
There we go. Now we'll talk about me for 5 minutes because it's a lot more...
No, honestly, you're not that important.
Yeah,
right.
Come on then.
This has gone on for years, James. So we've had like 1.5, 2 million people unemployed for years. We're not just talking like, oh, we've only got 2 years to like get these jobs filled.
We've always had unemployment, Lee. It's as long as we've had jobs.
Right. So Blair opened the floodgates. Only 30, 40,000...
Hang on, what was unemployment in 1979, Lee?
No, I'm talking Blair. He was 97.
No, I'm talking pre-Blair, because you said he opened the floodgates. What was unemployment in 1979?
Off the top of my head, I was 8, so I don't really know.
All right. What was it in 1998?
Again, to be honest, I was working. I didn't really pay a lot of attention.
But then you can't use it as evidence for an argument if you don't know, Lee.
Well, you can do. So,
all right, of course you can.
Right, so, no, just listen, and then you'll get my point.
That's not certain.
Right, so Blair opened the floodgates back in 98, 2000, whenever it was.
Well, when was it? You tell me, because it must have made a massive difference to your life.
Figure on it then. Oh, no, 2000 then.
Right, was it 2000?
Just say, for instance.
No, you have to tell me when it was, because it made such a huge impact on your life. If you can't remember, then you're going to make yourself look a bit silly, Lee.
It don't really matter what year it is.
OK. So it was massive, but you can't remember when it was?
No, I didn't say it was massive. You're putting words in my mouth.
Well, floodgates are pretty big. Floods are generally considered to be large quantities of water. Maybe I misunderstood you. Maybe a flood isn't a large quantity of water in Bromley.
Well, it was. It went from 30, 40,000 to 700,000.
When?
But according to you, it had no effect on anything.
Well, no, when did that happen? And it had a huge effect on things. Matt, if it wasn't for European immigration, am I right in thinking you wouldn't be in business at all?
we would struggle without correct planning.
There you go, Lee. It had a massive impact. No one's saying it didn't have a massive impact. Matt wouldn't be in business if it wasn't for those floodgates opening.
Right, but perhaps when them floodgates did open, if we was training our own people back then, they'd be qualified now.
Yes.
We wouldn't need
Now you've made a really good
immigration
point. So what we need is a time machine.
All right. So you're just twisting.
I'm not,
do you know
Lee.
what? You're like,
I'm holding up a
honestly,
mirror,
you're really
mate.
good.
I'm holding
No,
up a
you're not.
mirror.
You're really good.
I'm holding up a
And
mirror.
again, because you do, honestly. You're
Look
very
in the
good at
mirror, Lee.
twisting. Okay. Oh well. Let's talk. All right.
Look in the mirror,
I
Lee.
want to get at. Can I just get one thing at?
Nope.
Oh, all right. Fair enough.
Oh, go on then.
All right. Petrol prices.
No, I've changed my mind again. No, I haven't. No, you do it. Talk about petrol prices. Go on.
It'll take 2 minutes. Right. After Brexit, the next day, petrol prices went up. You was on the radio. Always listen to you. Even though I want to punch you, but I think you're brilliant. But
I think threats of violence probably constitute a line, don't they, Lee?
That's just no. Don't take that as real. That's
You've said it out loud in front of 814,000 people. I think you've lost the right to contribute to a sensible, grown-up discussion.
That's not what I meant.
What did you mean when you said you wanted to punch me?
That's just honestly, if I see it, I would not punch.
Well, what did you mean when you said it, Lee?
It's just because you're infuriating.
Well, no. What did you mean when you said you wanted to punch me?
Oh God, really? Honestly, can I just take that back then? Can you just accept an apology? I'm sorry I said that. I'll take that back. Obviously, I wouldn't do anything like that.
How do I know?
Figure of speech. Oh God, really? Can you just let me get my point out?
Well, you just threatened to punch me.
Seriously.
Yeah, you did, seriously.
Oh, God. It's just...
Go on then, make your point about petrol, Lee.
Right, so you blamed Brexit for petrol prices.
No, I didn't.
The very next day.
No, I didn't. That was the fall in the pound. The fall in the pound was responsible for petrol prices going up.
OK, fine. But nothing to do with greedy oil companies. Because just listen to this point. You remember when it was all going down, and it went down to £1 a litre? Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. So it went down, didn't it? But it weren't going down at the pump. So the AA, well, oh no, because like there's still the deer stuff in the pump. It's going to take a couple of weeks to get through. All right, fair enough. We all accepted that. So don't that work the other way? So just because the pan went down, the stuff that's still in the pumps should have been the same price, surely. But they just, oh no, because pan, we'll put it up. But you bought it and said, oh yeah, it's because the pan, because of Brexit, that's why it's gone up. So we're all going to have to pay more money for petrol. That should have took 2-3 weeks to go through.
Well, you're suggesting that it was 2 or 3 weeks difference.
Yeah, but you just blamed it straight on Brexit.
No, I didn't, Lee. I explained why the price of petrol, if it's imported from overseas and is generally traded in dollars, then a fall in the pound will impact immediately on petrol pump prices. Do I think that petrol suppliers are also greedy? Yes, I do. They don't cancel each other out, Lee. Can I ask you a personal question? I did, Lee. I did. I've explained it endlessly, but people sometimes don't hear. They only hear what they want to hear. If someone says to you later today, what were you doing this morning? You say, I found that O'Brien bloke on the radio, and they say, how did it go, mate? What are you going to say to them, just out of interest?
I got mugged up a bit. But that's what I said. You're really good at what you do.
Why mugged off? Why can't you just say, he explained some stuff to me, and I realised why I was wrong?
Yeah, but you do.
And then I told him I wanted to hit him.
Oh, come on! I've already took that back.
In some circles, threats of violence are a little bit out of the ordinary. Thankfully, I'm used to it, Lee, but not everybody is. So watch your mouth next time. Matt in Richmond, my apologies. What did you want to talk about?
Well, I thought, hi James. Never phoned the show before, but
that was quite a baptism, wasn't it?
It was very good. I thought I'd get through to you probably a bit quicker than I could to Amber Rudd, just to maybe say that it's possibly a little bit too late now to be looking at what the economic benefits of all the wonderful EU migrants are, because I think it's fairly obvious what their benefits are. And I sort of agree with the chat before. It would be nice to use English guys to fill all the jobs. If they, fundamentally, we need to put the clock back 10 years, train them all, and then we could do it. So maybe if we have a transition period of, let's say, 5 to 10 years rather than 12 months, we might be able to fill some of the jobs.
At the moment, I employ 60 people, 10% UK, 10% English, 90% Eastern European.
They are already going home because of the fall of the value of the sterling. So we're already beginning to lose them. So I'm actively trying. I've got 4 recruitment agencies trying to get me new guys to come and work in the construction industry.
This is like a rock and a hard place, isn't it? Because you are an employer. You describe the enormous difficulty that you're having in finding staff, and I'm going to allow myself to say people like Lee are the kind of people who ordinarily argue furiously that there is, undercutting going on. And if you can't find staff, then that's the opposite of undercutting. You have to raise your rates.
Absolutely. The whole undercutting argument of Eastern Europeans working for less than the English guys is a complete myth. My Eastern European guys are paid more than the English equivalent because they are fundamentally better than the English guys at what they do. They come from a proper apprenticeship background. They've all got the right tools, and they can all do the proper job. The English guys...
And this is it. This is part of the answer to the question. So when all this is published in a detailed analysis of the economic and social contributions and costs, the government, whoever it is at the time, will hope that persuades people that perhaps they've got the wrong end of the stick with regard to the immigration issue. But, of course, the people who've been selling the wrong end of the stick for the last 10 years will be screaming about establishment stitch-ups and government cover-ups.
Or what they probably are, what she's hoping, or they're hoping, the reason they've done it a year late, everyone's saying, the TBI saying they've done it a year late, it isn't coincidence, it's planned. So when they release that, they're saying in September next year they're going to release the report. We've only gone then 6 months until March, so that stage is all too late. So we're going to have to skip with whatever the report says. Oh, sorry, Trump. Yeah, it's a bit late. We are in a bit of a problem. There is no time for a transition period now. Oops, we're out.
Yeah, well, I hope you're wrong, obviously. Phone line was a bit bad towards the end there. I hope everybody else could make out what Matt was saying. It's 17 minutes after 11. It's a bit like those, I use this analogy a lot, those old magic eye things from the 80s. You stare and stare and stare at them in the hope of seeing the optical illusion dissolve and the image that's hidden behind the squiggles and the things. Why is Amber Rudd doing this now? Is actually a more interesting question, perhaps, than what she's likely to discover. I think... Well, there are 2 schools of thought on what she's likely to discover. She's either likely to discover the truth, or, if you don't recognise the truth when it's sitting on your head, she's likely to discover some massive cover-up claiming that EU migration is good for the British economy. Gary knows what he's talking about. He says, 2 simple truths about mass immigration. It depresses wages and drives up housing costs for everybody. Fundamental law of supply and demand. Unless you're in Germany, where they've got more immigration and much greater wage inflation than we've got, Gary. But, simple truth. Certainly simple. Giancarlo's in Holborn. Giancarlo, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I want to say that the people that come to the UK or to any other country to work, most of the times they are highly specialized, because the time that in the 70s, for example, in Portugal, that people left Portugal because of the state of the country. They didn't have like much specialization, so they will just go to other countries to be builders or to be cleaners. We are the kids of those people, and basically we are highly specialized. And when we go to another country to work, we are free of any cost of education to that country.
Oh, well, that's a very good point. But your children will go to school. Although again, I'm uncomfortable. I would think it was Lee, wasn't it, talking about the cost of educating children. It's a really good example, unintentionally, of calling for people to be treated differently according to their ethnicity. If you're working here and paying tax, your children have as much right to go to school as my children do.
Yes, but and also not only that. We being like highly specialized.
No, not all of you, Giancarlo. I mean, there will still be a lot of emigres in this country who are doing unskilled jobs. And I'm uncomfortable with the word unskilled, actually, because I think that bonhomie is a skill. And I know when I speak to people in the catering industry, they want young, cheerful, bright-faced people, which is actually a skill, but it wouldn't be registered as a skill on any official list, would it?
Yes, when I say specialize, it's more like, for example, like I am like motion designer, and to be trained to be like motion designer, you need to go to college, and you need to have at least 7 to 10 years of like experience to reach the point where I am. And when I came to this country, I was like ready to work like in the high-end special effects. Another example is like my wife. She's like a mathematician and specialized in in statistics, and now she's working for.
But we certainly don't need any statisticians. They're the enemy of the people. They're top of the list, Giancarlo. Statisticians, imagine the damage they're going to do.
Yeah, but not only that. Like I have like most of my friends that they are here. They're really happy of like being here. But and they are like engineers. They are people that work on IT, in maths and things like that. And we are all like pay our taxes. We all we are like police each other just to check if we are doing the right thing, because we had like a massive amount of like young people that left Portugal on the last 10 years. And
presumably it's a little bit surreal to you that we're having conversations like this, and that is why Amber Rudd has had to commission this analysis, because what is blindingly obvious to anybody with their eyes open and their fingers not in their ears has to be now officially formalised before the country faces this deep unknown, this great unknown.
Yes, but my assessment regarding what the states in the UK, it's more or less like the same thing that Portugal was in the beginning of the 90s. That everyone was like spending loads of money in debt, and they were just doing crazy things. Like the banks were like loaning tons of money, and in the end it happened like a big recession that everyone was like almost like without work, and that was what caused people to leave the country. And the consequence is that like after like 20 years, the government now are like giving incentives to young people that left Portugal to go back to Portugal, because now they realize that they don't have enough people working, and they want the people that are like abroad that have this amount of like experience working in high-end companies to go back to Portugal and just start revitalizing the country again.
And that is, you know, a freedom that will be denied to young British people seeking work in foreign territories, or just seeking, you know, a broader world view. I have a theory. Can I run it by you?
Yes.
Is it in terms, because I was chatting to a German banker the other day, one of the brightest people I've met in years, actually, and they're off to Madrid, and he described, he was talking about an almost feudal atmosphere that he hadn't really realised was commonplace in Britain before he came here. But I was in France a couple of weekends ago, and as ever, I'm sort of constantly trying to understand worldviews that are different from my own. And I have a theory that the attitude to Europe is, I mean, the obvious bit is that we're an island. But if you're driving around southern France and you can see on a road sign, Barcelona, 200 kilometres away, or you're in a different part of France and there's road signs with German towns and German cities, the very notion of Europe is different to people on the mainland. It's a lot easier just to see it as a territory, a continent that is shared, whereas because we are more cut off from the mainland, it's easier for some people who are made in a certain way to fail ever to grasp that notion of a shared territory. Do I sound bonkers, or do you think there might be something in that?
No, I do agree with you, because, for example, Portugal have also like islands like Azores and Madeira, and people there also like speak of the continent on the same way that UK speaks of Europe. But the relationship between Europe and the relationship between UK and Europe, it has been always like a little bit schizophrenic.
Yes,
if I might say, just because I reckon that UK was never all in Europe.
Yeah, this is Jason Farrell's book. He was in a couple of weeks ago. Is very strong on this, on that sort of historical disconnect and a complete misrepresentation of fact of why Margaret Thatcher effectively founded the single market, why Winston Churchill effectively laid the foundation stones for the European Union. But it's called exceptionalism. It's amazing how many prominent Brexiteers are historians. They did history at university. They didn't even do PPE. And if you studied history at an English university in the 1990s, you could perhaps have come away with a sort of ladybird book notion of British exceptionalism. I mean, Giancarlo mentions Portugal. Portugal had an enormous empire. Spain had an enormous empire. Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, they've got their own Walter Raleighs, their own Francis Drakes. But something about the way we've studied history has created this slightly odd notion that we're different from other people, whereas, of course, societies are always at their strongest when they recognise similarities. Giancarlo, thank you. It's half an hour until Mystery Hour. I'll be very glad. No one's ever threatened to punch me during Mystery Hour, have they? I'd like to think that was a given. I'd like to think that was one of the few truths upon which we could all agree. It's 11:30. I mean, the question that probably is wriggliest today is, why has Amber Rudd waited until the 27th of July 2017 to commission an independent analysis of the economic and social contributions and cost of EU citizens in Britain? And even if the independent reporting in April is true, why on earth did Theresa May, as Prime Minister, attempt to sabotage an attempt to explain to the British public why EU migration is a great benefit to this country? And the only answer I've got is time. The clock is ticking. Theresa May's authority is diminished, so Amber Rudd can actually act according to her intellect and conscience rather than pragmatism and self-interest. And she knows, as the deadline looms, that people are going to need a lot of help understanding why we're not, for example, building an enormous wall around our country. Oh man, the work that's ahead for future generations. Do you know when they were trying to book economists to defend the notion of leaving the European Union, it was quite a struggle, because I hear the producers on other programmes, there was usually the same 2 or 3 people, whereas if you were trying to book an economist from the other side of the argument, you could choose from hundreds. I don't think that's a controversial observation. It's perfectly possible that the handful on one side were right and the massive majority on the other side were wrong. But there was one fellow called Andrew Lillico. I don't know if you ever came across him during these discussions. I don't think he's changed his mind on this, but I saw him on Twitter yesterday saying it'll be about 2030 after leaving the European Union before we get back to roughly where we are now economically. I can't help thinking that if that had been on the side of a bus, things might have turned out slightly differently. You're going to be worse off until at least 2030. After that, I don't know what comes after that. But it possibly highlights that gulf between economic and social analysis and rhetoric. I don't know. Sam is in Wandsworth. Sam, why do you think it's taken Amber Rudd until now to commission a report into facts regarding immigration?
Hello, James. First-time caller.
You're very welcome.
Not offering you a punch. I'll offer you a handshake instead.
It's the 21st century. Let's have a hug. Carry on.
Oh, good. I'm glad you said that. I am a hugger. I think it's twofold with Amber Rudd's offer. I think it's time, like you say. I think the time is ticking, and we're closer to the need for detail and action rather than rhetoric. And I think there's a very gradual and perceptible turn, even amongst the Tory base, amongst the press they listen to, that there needs now to be policy. There needs to be a defined path. If the Tories are indeed the party of capitalism,
yes,
as they claim, their supporters, big and small business alike, need to know the future. They need to be able to plan. They surely must be having their willies put up on the bit by city firms, huge international city firms, making contingencies to move staff to European financial centres.
Well, not just contingencies, of course. They are moving as well. Although we should stress that BMW did announce this week that it's going to carry on building minis in Cowley, albeit with batteries and engines that will now be brought over from Germany rather than made here, as was previously the case.
But at least it seems that the 2040 announcement, a long-term investment in the country, which must be very pleasing for everyone involved.
Exactly.
But, the party of the city, if we can break them down to something as basic as that, and city firms are saying, oh, Dublin, Frankfurt look great, we're going to move hundreds of staff to begin with. That's the beginnings of the pressure that we were told by the most ardent Remainers would start to come. It's taken a little longer than we thought, perhaps, but it is biting. So they have to start showing some form of policy. This government, post the snap election, hasn't had any, because all they've had to do is talk about Brexit and put David Davies out front. And now I think there's a need to start facing reality.
What they've got then, this is a very powerful contribution. What they've got is a tension between, as I listen to you, I'm thinking on one side the money and on the other side the mob. And traditionally their job is to keep both sides happy, which you can do usually by doing whatever the money tells you to do and telling the mob whatever it is they want to hear. That's kind of bread and circuses type stuff. But what Amber Rudd has to do now is keep the money happy, which is, to everybody's benefit, arguably. A well-run economy, a wealthy country is good for everybody. She's got to keep the money happy But that's going to involve policies that the mob have spent 10 years being told have brought the country to its knees. And that's why she needs facts now. So she can go to the mob and say, no, look, actually, we need this and we need that, and that will go under, and da-da-da-da-da. So she's hoping that the mob will be responsive to facts. And that's why she's now going out looking for the facts.
And I think it's the gradual introduction of those facts. If it's a Tory-commissioned independent report by a vocally, we don't know necessarily emotionally, but now a vocally pro-Brexit cabinet, then they can start to say, oh no, look, there is real reason for this, and the real reason for this is, money and jobs, and how they turn that into the emotional argument you spoke at the top of the programme in particular about.
Yes.
How do you get the emotion into that, the emotion that I think you think, one, Brexit, over fact. How do you start bringing that in? And it can only be by the drip.
I don't think you can.
In reality,
I wouldn't fancy that job. I don't know about you. I just
maybe not the furthest reaches, but certainly the middle ground that were swayed by emotion. But
there was a piece there was a blog in the Spectator by a chap called Ed West that I read yesterday, who sort of said, I voted to leave, but if the economic damage is as bad as it currently looks like it might be, then I certainly didn't vote for that. So that's what you're describing. That softening of the more thoughtful side of the movement, so to speak.
Yes.
And the more facts you can provide. I just don't think. I've been doing this job. How long have I been doing this job? 12 or 13 years. And I don't think it's ever been possible to have a conversation about immigration which confined itself to facts. That's the problem she's got.
Very much so. It's a terrible job to do that, and she's got an immigration minister that is mumbling nonsense behind her.
And you've still got racist liars in positions of prominence getting paid for spouting their racist lies.
Very much so.
Which is a big problem for her as well. And in fact, going back to the money versus the mob, a lot of the people who own the newspapers would be on the money side of it. That's the thing I find so confusing. How are they going to be better off? How does the owner of the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Mail or the Daily Express think that they're going to be better off when so much of the business community reports that they're going to be worse off?
Perhaps because they're not selling product that will be determined or be staffed by the people who we will lose, or the custom who we will lose.
So they can carry on making their... Well, although they do rely on advertisers. I mean, that's a conversation that I would love to have with one of them, but I don't think the chances of that ever happening are very high. And the Times Diary reported about a month ago that the owner of it was a chap called Spencer Churchill, I'm not sure which one, was talking about a conversation that he'd had with the owner of the Daily Mail, in which the owner of the Daily Mail said they might up sticks and move to Ireland after Brexit because of the economic and commercial impact upon his interests. It may not have been true. It was in the Times Diary. Sam, thank you. Mark's in Solihull. Mark, what would you like? Actually, I've got a couple of phone lines for you. I'm going to carry on with this until 12 because I can't think of anything else worth talking about. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, and then we'll crack on with Mystery Hour, which goodness knows we could all do with a giggle. Mark, what do you want to say?
Hello, James. First time caller, so I'm nervous as hell at the minute.
As long as you don't threaten to punch me, we'll get on fine.
No, I won't. Honestly, I heard that. I won't do that. My own circumstances is I'm an engineer. I'm sort of an international engineer as well. I work all around the UK and Ireland and everywhere. And it's rarely I go into a factory and meet an English person now these days, to be honest. Yeah. Not that I've got a problem with that at all, but I have noticed the cultural change. But I want to approach this from a different angle and say, that UK employers to rely so much on foreign workers and immigrant workers is slightly flawed to me, because let's say, for example, that Brexit didn't happen and things were as they were before the referendum last year.
Yeah.
And what would happen if the immigrants decided to leave on their own accord because perhaps economically their own countries are doing much better? So what would happen then? What's their contingency plan? That's what I would like to know.
Because of the reliance on foreign labour being so great, I think you've got it's actually a worldview issue because I've been trying to wriggle this from a slightly different angle, and I think the point about the single market. This is what I was talking to that German banker about a couple of weeks ago, and they don't see it like we see it. They see the single market as a single market, whereas the conversation that we're having now by definition sees it as a fractured market where you're going to move back to your country. And that's going to be true of some people, certainly.
Yeah.
But it's a single market. So they would sort of not necessarily move back to their own country of origin. They might move to France or Germany, like they're doing, like we're seeing. I've just been sent an article that Reuters published by a fruit farmer in Britain who's thinking about relocating to Poland. Flipping marvellous, isn't it? But do you see what I mean? So this is our island mentality, and I'm not criticising you because I think I use the same sort of language. They see it as a single market, whereas you're describing it as lots and lots of separate markets.
Well, I do, but the trouble is, I mean, I've experienced working in Poland and Lithuania myself, and I know exactly what wages are paying. Yeah, and funny enough, I work for British companies in Lithuania that are paying £3 an hour. So my own circumstances, I would quite happily go and pick cabbages in Australia if they're paying 4 times what I'm earning now. And that's the way I see it. They've obviously they're driven economically to reap the benefits of whoever's paying the most. So let's, for example, I mean, I think Poland's economy is slightly picking up now. So if I'm only picking out the Polish because I've experienced more of the Polish.
No, and lots of people will move back to Poland as the economy improves. My friend Eric, who run a building company in West London, has sort of passed it on, I think. I haven't seen him for a while, but he's moved back to Poland and he got British citizenship. So you will see that wax and wane, but I think we've got a weird view of it, largely because we move so little. You're quite rare yourself in that you're hopping off all over the place. Most people don't.
Yeah.
They don't even contemplate the possibility of moving to Germany for work, whether they're picking cabbages or writing incredibly complicated computer code. We've got an odd world view, and that's part of the reason why we are where we are.
I mean, the other thing I'd like to add as well, I mean, no one seems to mention this, and I've picked up on this, is that the reason we didn't have this 20 or 30 years ago is because we didn't have the demand from supermarkets like we do now. I mean, with this low-cost, high volumes, that's the reason they're paying such low wages and bringing in immigrant workers to pick cabbages, or whatever it may be.
But they're not. Do you know that because it's piecework, some of the fruit and vegetable picking that goes on isn't done for a pittance. It would be if it was a fixed rate and they'd struggle to get the people to do it. But because a lot of it is piecework, they actually do well. As far as food costs go, it can't be unique to the United Kingdom, Mark. It just can't be. These are, Lidl and Aldi, they're massive German companies. There's no way that there's anything unique about our market. It's just that we still grow stuff, people come and pick it. But they're not coming anymore. Already they're not coming. 134 vacancies this time last year in April in the fruit and veg picking sector, 1,500 in 2017. Mark, thank you. It's 11:46. Oddly, given that Parliament isn't sitting at the moment, the political landscape has proved quite interesting for our purposes, at least this morning. Mystery Hour's on the way in 10 minutes' time. The answer to that question of why now has the Home Secretary, when either she or the previous one, whose name eludes me, could have commissioned a detailed analysis of the economic and social contributions and costs of EU citizens in Britain. Why now? The answer has to be timing. It's the question and the answer. The question's about timing. The answer is timing. As March 2019 looms ever closer, you will see a growing divide between the ideologues, whose policy they would rather see built upon impulses and intuitions and feelings, and the pragmatists who recognise that policies probably have to be built upon evidence. So Amber Rudd seems to me to be launching a quest for evidence upon which she will seek to build policy. I think she's got a big shock coming because, well, people don't necessarily respond to evidence in a rational way. Theo Usherwood is the political editor of LBC. The BBC's political editor has taken a few weeks off after working so hard over the... Why are you still here?
I did have a week off.
Just a week? This is outrageous. You should be putting your feet up for a lot longer. Go on.
I will be taking some more time off, but... going on to this announcement from Amber Rudd this morning, plans to control EU migration post-March 2019 when the Article 50 negotiations come to a close. As you've been discussing, the Home Secretary has asked the Migration Advisory Committee to provide a detailed assessment of the impact of EU migration on the British economy, the costs and the benefits. It's due out September 2018, and of course Amber Rudd has been keen to assure businesses there'll be no cliff edge once those negotiations come to a close. In other words, there will be transitional arrangements. We're going to hear a lot of that. Implementation periods is the euphemism that the government uses, where Britain is outside the EU but will be subject to similar rules, broadly similar rules as to now, in order to assure the economy doesn't go into freefall. However, there is a fear amongst Eurosceptics within the Conservative Party and beyond that the words no cliff edge, a code for soft Brexit, that somehow ministers could be welching on Theresa May's Lancaster House speech. Now, Amber Rudd has written to Professor Alan Manning, he is the chairman of that committee, and she has told him that during the transitional arrangements, i.e. after March 2019, but before they come to an end, they could be 2 or 3 years, EU migrants will have to register when they arrive in the UK. And I've got the extract from the letter. During this period, there will be a straightforward system for the registration and documentation of new arrivals. A registration system that enables EU citizens to demonstrate their right to live and work in the UK is the basic requirement to be able to operate any system of immigration control. Now, as we already know...
Like they do in Belgium and Germany already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So they don't. She doesn't say, as we have been free to do since the Maastricht Treaty, but they're going to do it now.
Yeah, they're going to do it.
Got you.
As we already know, in the longer term...
I love it when Theo comes in. You can feel the clouds clearing, can't you, in your comprehension of these complicated issues as the mighty Usherwood wields his trusty sword of truth.
That was your pickup, James. I defer completely. As we already know, in the longer term, they would be subject to, quote unquote, a grace period and only allowed to stay permanently depending on the rules at the time. They have yet to be decided and, of course, will have to be
Do we know what the grace period under the terms of the EU treaty would be? 3 months.
Yeah. There is some... The negotiation, they're hoping, and of course it will depend on whether these are British rules that Amber Rudd is talking about, I should say. So
yes, but they're identical to the EU rules. That's the bit that she's not mentioning.
Right. Of course, there is a bit of confusion, James, around Amber Rudd's announcement. She was in effect saying the government didn't want to harm business. And then her junior minister in the Home Office, Brandon Lewis, when he came out this morning and said that freedom of movement would come to an end in 2019 at the conclusion of the Article 50 talks. Now, this letter seeks to bridge that gap, registering to vote.
Are they contradicting each other, or is you can wriggle it somehow to say, well, freedom of movement in one sense will end, but in another sense it won't, and they're both talking about it in different senses?
Registering to vote, if you're registering to vote, that is in effect... registering to come into the UK, providing documentation that you have the right to live within the UK.
Yes.
That, in effect, is the end of freedom of movement as we know it right now.
Except that if we're still members of the European Union and when we do it, it would be, if it wasn't allowed under European rules, we wouldn't be able to do it. So the fact that we're doing it at all, whether you call it British or European or whatever...
But you just said we could already do this.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Happy days. No wonder. I mean, I'm confused. How are you feeling?
But the point is...
Axel, are you confused? Axel's confused.
To try and clear that confusion, James,
yes.
I think what the government's trying to do is it's trying to keep both camps happy. It's trying to assure businesses on the one hand, ensure that...
but it can't do that indefinitely, can it?
No, and then at the same time keep the Eurosceptics within the own party happy. And it's worth mentioning quite a key appointment today that's been announced today, Stuart Jackson, who of course campaigned with Nigel Farage during the EU referendum campaign, going into the Department for Exiting the European Union to be David Davis's Chief of Staff. And of course Steve Baker, who is a big campaigner for leaving the European Union during that campaign, is already a junior minister there. So you have a different, you have a wide split, wide variety of views within the government at the moment, and I think the Home Office is trying to ensure that that there isn't that the whole thing doesn't fall apart, and if you can keep both camps happy, then you'll sort of keep the show on the road.
Yeah, that's it, I think. You've nailed it. Trying to keep two very disparate strands of the same party happy. And it can't be done indefinitely, can it? And that's possibly why Rudd has commissioned this thing, because she's hoping that you're going to have to start splitting the split, aren't you? And you're going to have to start hoping that rather good blog in the Spectator yesterday by Ed West is more representative than perhaps people like me allow, and that more and more people will when presented with evidence. Because really, the debate should be over when you point out to people that under European Union rules, as other countries demonstrate, you can control immigration.
Yes.
But it isn't over. So that's the challenge she faces.
I emailed a friend in the Home Office this morning asking for more details, and he came back to me and said, can I reply to your answer in full in March 2019?
Yeah.
And then it'll only be a transitional answer.
Ah, yes, how we laugh. But you saw that line from the economist Andrew Lillico, the very, very prominent Leave economist Andrew Lillico yesterday. He said that by 2030 we might, ideally, we'll be back to where we are now, roughly.
I didn't see it, but
now you do.
No, I do. I know all about it.
Theo Usherwood with his trusty sword of truth, waving it on your behalf. Political editor of LBC. Many thanks indeed. Should I squeeze in one more? I mystery hour on the way. I'll squeeze in Andy in St Albans. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think you and Theo covered most of it there, but...
No, I didn't do anything. I just sat there heckling.
I mean, why David Cameron wouldn't have called for a report like this in the lead-up to the referendum, I wouldn't know.
Didn't know he needed it. Didn't think he needed it.
Exactly, like complacency and all that. But then after Brexit, given the will of the people and everything that the 52% voted for, Theresa May couldn't have called for a report like this because it would completely weaken her stance on Brexit, and just mean that she's trying to go against Brexit and get everyone up in arms about it.
But you can't. You possibly have an even more cynical view of your fellow man than I do. If somebody stood up and said we are commissioning an analysis of facts, we are looking for facts, how can anyone get up in arms about that?
Well, I mean, you've already been threatened to be punched today, so...
Yes, this is true, although I don't know that Lee was necessarily objecting to facts.
No.
I think he was objecting more to having his own reflection shown to him.
No, but I think the media... Well, I'd say some of your right-wing media friends may try and spin it a certain way and think that it's trying to scupper Brexit plans, whereas now the position's already weakened and we are getting closer, so yeah, now it's come down to timing.
And I get, it depends how many people will never believe that EU migration is in general a benefit to this country. That's really where we are now. Between now and March 2019, that's the challenge that government face. They have to work out how many people will never believe it to be true, regardless of how much evidence is put in front of them. Do you want to have a guess at the percentage? So a percentage of the 52% that would be utterly, utterly intractable, Andy, what would you say?
Probably go with about 35 of the 52.
Yeah, so 30% of the 52%. So you're looking at about 15% of the whole electorate, which generally tallies with what you could loosely describe as bovine extremism in most electorates.